There's a story in the book of John that used to baffle me, but now the Lord has helped me to understand it. It's a story of Jesus at the wedding with his mom, and I think his brothers and his sisters were there. And it used to baffle me because when you read it in the King's English, it just doesn't make any sense. Basically, they run out of wine, and she comes to him and she says, "Hey, they're out of wine." He's like, "What do I have to do with you, woman? My hour has not yet come." If you read it in that sense, it just makes no sense. It's like, what are you distancing yourself from your own mother, and because she's intruding on God's timeline? I guess is the best, that we could come up with, and I could come up with in that sense. But when you take it out of that realm and you think of Jesus, when you think of him as one of us, as in the book of Hebrews, he's called our brother a couple times. Firstborn among many brethren, he is not ashamed to call them brethren, he says about us. And God's our Father. When you think of him in that context, this story makes sense. So they're all at the wedding, they're having a good time, and weddings lasted like a week back then. So, which explains why they needed so much wine, because each pot held 20 to 30 gallons, and there was, 6 pots, I think? 6 of them? That's a lot of wine. It's because the weddings lasted like a week, right? So it wasn't just a one-nighter. And Jesus had a great relationship with his mom. If anybody had a good relationship with his mom, it's Jesus. Okay, and we can see it in this story. So they run out of wine, and she comes to him, and she would have known all about him and who he was in his ministry, because the Holy Spirit made that clear to her and Joseph long before he was even conceived, right? The whole thing with the angel and the Holy Spirit conceiving him in her, and the whole thing with Elizabeth and Zacharias and John and all this stuff, they knew all this stuff. So, and it's not a stretch, I'm sure, to understand that Jesus would have talked to his mom about this, and his dad, Joseph, right? And they were all like in the know, right? So probably Jesus' mom, as well as Jesus, knew that his time for his ministry wasn't yet, right? Because we know this is the first miracle that he did. That's what John tells us. So under that context, his mom comes to him and she's like, "Hey man, they're out of wine." And Jesus looks at her, knowing what I just said, and he's like, "Oh mom, what am I going to do with you? You know it's not my time yet." Right? And then he smiles at her, and he's like, and she laughs, and right, it was one of those deals which we can understand because we do those kind of things, right? He was one of us. Yes, he's deity, but he's also one of us, right? So in this context, it's much more understandable and relatable, right? Which makes sense. He's a very relatable guy. He is love. God is love. If you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father, right? I and the Father are one, he said. So when we understand Jesus in this context and think about the dynamics of him and his ministry and his relationship with his parents, it makes much more sense, right? He'd just be like, "Oh, mom, come on. What am I going to do with you? You know it's not time for me to start doing this stuff yet." Really? Right? Just like that. And she's like, she kind of snickers, and walks away and looks back at him. He's like, and she's like, "Okay, whatever he says to do, do it." Right? Because she knew he was going to do it anyways. Right? So you might think this is an irreverent take on that story, but I've read that story, I don't know how many times, I can't remember, for decades, and every time I read it, it just didn't make any sense. It's like, what is going on? Something obviously holy and beyond my understanding, and that's just like God. Why? Because it's in the Bible, it's for our sake, right? It doesn't make sense that it'd be some mysterious thing way beyond our reach, right? Or else, why is it in the Bible? Why'd God put it there? Makes sense that he'd be showing us, hey, Jesus is a very relatable guy, and he had this kind of relationship with his mom, Just like you guys have these kind of relationships with your parents and the people you love, right? And so what does Jesus do? Ever in tune with the Father, he's like, okay, Father, are we going to do one before the time? And Father's like, yes, okay, I guess we'll do one before the time. And it's not a stretch if you think about being a parent, if you are a parent, and I am a parent, and I've done these kind of things, like when your kids ask you for stuff, and it's like, it's not quite the time to do them, or it's, like maybe it's a day or two before Christmas, right? Or it's not quite their birthday, and you're like, okay, go ahead, you can do one, right? It's that kind of thing. Which makes sense because we're made in his image, right? So it was like, okay, yes, there's a time to do these certain things, but it's not going to hurt if we do one before the time, right? Irreverent or realistic from a God who knows us and we're made in his precise image. Thanks, and have a great day.